Baba knows the way. For Joseph Baba Ifa, Baba knows the way. We follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients. He honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.
Hey family, thank you for tuning in to Our Roots podcast with Joseph Baba Ifa, where only the strongest roots see the light, brought to you by Botaniga Candles and more. And if you haven't had the opportunity, hit that subscribe button. Tell them, Phil.
That's right. What's going on?
What's happening?
Happy Sunday, man. It's
Happy Sunday, brother.
Good day, man. And guys, don't forget to join our membership program. It's an awesome feature for you guys. We got over 1,600 videos on our channel, and a lot of them are exclusive to the members. That's extra episodes, early releases to the podcast, discounts on merch and classes, and separate videos that just spotlight some of the comments that you guys leave. And Joseph expands on them a little bit instead of just leaving a two-sentence reply.
Yeah.
And so if you have any actual questions that you really want answered, make sure you join our membership program, and hopefully your question will get its own separate video.
Absolutely.
So, sounds good.
No, and I like that a lot because, I'm able to focus on the question. I tell you guys have some great comments sometimes, but to be able to get to all of them is extremely difficult. I always try to give them a thumbs up and a heart. But the comments have been quite bombarding lately, Phil. I'm not sure, but from time to time, I remember I had a hand to be filed one week, and I wasn't looking at my phone and things like that because Erica looks at it, you look at it, I look at it. We kind of share the brunt of all that, and I remember looking, it was like 30 of them, and I'm like, wow, we've been busy. You know, so it's wild. And guys, another great way to get your questions answered and interact with us is by being present at our workshops in Atlanta and New York. So we're happy to make those happen and interact with everybody, going over a bunch of great topics over a 48-hour span. So really exciting stuff. So today's episode, we're going to be continuing with our Ogbe series and go over the Odu Obesa. So, Obesa, one of the most popular Odus in Ifa for sure. It's very frequent. It comes out a lot of mysteries of Ifa manifested here. Really enjoyable Odu to study if you're able to pull out the positives from it and really learn from the flaws that it could have sometimes. One of the positives, though, without much flaw, is this is one of the Odus from an Isheshe standpoint that speaks of when Ogun initiated as a Babalawo. Another one is Irosotu Alara. So a lot of Ogun brothers come up to me, whether they're Babalaos, Hand of Ifas, etc., and they're like, Baba, I want to do Ifa, but, they say the son of Ogun, this, that, and the third. And this is one of those perfect Odus that speaks of why the son of Ogun is a predilect child of Ifa, where he should. So if someone has Ogbe Sa and they're a son of Ogun and they're interested in becoming Babalawo, please do, because it's definitely a Odu that facilitates it. And the children of Ogun in general are excellent Babalaos. And this is one of the Odus that substantiates it. So I just wanted to throw that one out there. But the Odu Obesa, a lot of stories here. One of them was that Obesa wanted to create a family. He wanted to fall in love. And in the land where he lived, he wasn't having a lot of luck as far as compatibility goes. He was an eligible bachelor, but he really wasn't finding the woman that he felt was going to be his counterpart of compatibility. So therefore, he went to visit his godfather. Dafa was performed, and his own Odu Obesa was revealed, where his godfather said, I know you're going to travel. I know you're trying to find a wife. All of those things are going to go wonderfully for you. But to the land that you go, don't fall in love and stay. So Obesa took that advice, and he started on his expedition, right? Took many moons, many days, many nights, many suns. But, every evening, they say he would fall asleep, and he would look at the night sky and look at the moon. This is one of the Odus that speaks of the moon quite a bit, or Oshupa. And, he would say, man, I wonder if the woman that's meant for me is looking at this same moon. And he kept traveling, and he arrived in a land where he saw these giant crabs. And he was terrified. Imagine a King Kong-sized crab.
No.
So he was like, yo, I got to get out of here. They're going to cut my head off. So he dove into a cave. And in the cave, he saw a beautiful woman. Now, the interesting thing about this woman is he had actually dreamt about her under that moon. So when they locked eyes in a ways as if they had known each other. And she said, "Who are you?" You know, the first thing, she was a little scared. You know, a guy just comes into her cave. He's like, "My name is Ogbe Sa." And he's like, "Who are you?" She said, "My name is Oshun." And, you know, she's like, "Do I know you?" And he's like, "No, but I feel like I know you." She's like, "I think I've dreamt of you before." And he said, "I definitely dreamt of you." And she was like, "Yeah, I used to look at the sun, at the moon, and you know, wish that the man for me was looking at the same one." And he said, "Well, ironically, I dreamt about you after looking at that same moon yesterday." So they started talking, and they started realizing they were very compatible, and things moved very quickly, as they do in the old world. And you know, they were intimate, and they started a relationship. And you know, she explained that the crabs were her family and that they were a little toxic, and you know, he was trying to be on good terms with them, but she said they're never going to. In other versions, it was that the crabs wanted to marry Oshun, but she wasn't into crabs. So he gave her the idea. He said, "Well, why don't we leave? Why don't we go back to where I'm from? You know, I just got an Ifa divination that says if I fall in love somewhere, I shouldn't stay there. I should either not fall in love at all, or I should fall in love and bring the person back to where I'm from." And she was like, "No, I'm too afraid," or, you know, "I can never abandon them," or whatever it was. So the relationship between Oshun and Obesa actually started breeding a lot of jealousy from the crabs. So one day he left the cave to go fetch things for her, and they killed him, right? And he never made it back to the cave. So they say 7 years went by, right? This seems to be a recurring number and theme within Ifa. And his godfather realized, you know, more than likely his godson didn't listen to the advice. So he got, you know, his other 7 godsons and said, "Hey, I need you guys to go looking for Obesa to see what happened to him," right? So they all went. And, you know, they eventually arrived in the land of the crabs, and they saw the same crabs. And they went into the same cave. But when they went into the cave, they saw Oshun with a 7-year-old son. And they said, "You know, we're looking for this person," you know, and they looked at the boy and they said, "Man, that really looks like Obesa." And she said, "No, Obesa was my husband. He was the father of my son. You know, he didn't even get to see his son be born because the crabs killed him. You know, we never found him." Many of these things. And they said, "Well, you know, to lift this curse and to lift this situation, we have to perform Ifa initiation to the boy." It's one of the few scriptures that speaks of performing, you know, Itefa to a young child. But if you notice, he was 7 years old. So when they did that and they brought the boy out, the crabs recognized that, you know, one of their descendants, one of their family had become Babalawo. They were able to return the remains of Obesa in a way where they were able to perform the funeral rites and lift the curse of the father. And, you know, his son actually initiated and pulled the same Odu of Obesa. So they were able to move on and alleviate their lineage, right? The Odu Obesa says, "To the land that you go, don't fall in love. And if you do, make sure you bring the person back." So this Odu says that, you know, the person may end up falling in love with somebody that's not from where they are. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be a 90-day fiance, but, you know, it does state that, you know, if you're from Orlando, you might end up with a life partner from Tampa or something like that. So that's the first thing. This Odu speaks of the importance of the Orisha Oshun all the way around. This Odu speaks of the importance of chivalry and treating women with respect, because in this Odu, the crabs felt like Obesa disrespected Oshun, and because of it, they killed him. So Obesa states that, you know, gentlemanness, good manners, integrity, all of these things are important in the making of a gentleman, so that there's never any misunderstanding. Because in this Odu, Oshun and her children cursed Obesa. So it's definitely an Orisha that you have to be very careful with, because depending on how Obesa's relationship goes with the Orisha Oshun or their children, things can go very positively or very negatively for them. It does speak of ideal partnership. It speaks of being careful with in-laws and things like that, making sure that we understand. On the Odu of Obesa, it also speaks of the Orisha Obadala. And the Orisha Obadala had the secret of the Erindi Logun, right, which was the 16 cowrie shells that were used for divination. Now, the same way I talk about how Ogbe Sa could become Babalawo, Ogbe Sa is also one of the Odus of the Oriate, right? And Obatala was the first one. So Obatala was very, jealous with this secret because it gave him a lot of job stability. The other Orishas were at his behest. Oshun was somebody that was becoming progressively frustrated with this, and she actually wanted to learn the shell divination because, she was married to Orunmila, which, he stipulated, hey, there's nothing here for you to overindulge in, but you are compatible with the Erindilogun. We just have to find a way to get it from Obatala. So in some versions, through conversing with Orula, her husband, over and over again, they were able to have a sit down with Olodumare about the situation. In other versions, Oshun tricked Obatala out of the shell to the point where she said, now that you have to teach me, you have to teach everybody. But neither here nor there, the first Orisha who learned the Erindilogun from Obatala, at least in this Odu, was Oshun. So, she is seen as somebody per excellence within said oracle. And the other Orishas that were present for the class, learned it as well. Now, some of those Orishas, or some of the Orishas were not present. Some say that Ogun wasn't present, Ochosi wasn't present, Orisha Oko wasn't present, Erinle wasn't present, Odua wasn't present, and I believe Obaluaye. That's why some of the deities that weren't present don't have the shell to be able to speak for themselves, where you'll notice in the Lukumi context, and, to each his own with their criteria, in the Lukumi context, the shell of Yemaya speaks for Orisha Oko or speaks for Erinle. There's, people who say that Ogun doesn't, carry a shell divination along with Ochosi other than when they're actually crowned. The Odu Ofumei speaks of why Odua doesn't speak through the Erindilogun. Obaluayen, the Odu of Obeyono, and Irete Kana speaks of why he speaks through Ifa as well. So various concepts, but they all manifest here in Ogbe Sa, where Obatala was actually very impressed by Ochung's intelligence and astuteness within the shell, and they actually learned quite a bit from each other moving forward. But Ochung actually became a female Oriate there. So the Odu Obesa says the person has a lot of options when it comes to their spiritual career. If they feel called to the arts of Ifa and being Babalawo, and they're eligible, please do. But if you also feel called to the arts of, Oriate and Orisha and things like that, and shell throwing, please do. The one thing that this Odu says all around, or, in a rotund fashion, is that the person is meant to practice in a very influential way. Obesa is an unfulfilled person unless they're coordinating something or influencing something from a spiritual standpoint. It's an Odu of Oba, whether it's Ifa or whether it is Orisha, so it's very, very key there. And the person, is either going to be extremely intelligent or refined, or they're going to have to, put in a lot of work to be able to get there, because Obesa, if they're not careful, can be kind of like the crab. The crab, and this is a concept we went over in Oturamei as well, is either all brain or all mush, right? So Obesa has to be very careful to never stop learning or refining themselves, so that they can become a resource and somebody that can assist others, and create a career out of whatever they choose. But Ifa and Orisha may be an option as well. Continuing with the Orisha Oshun, because she is paramount here. Obesa was the personal alarm clock of Orunmila. And what I mean by that is at every morning at 4 a.m., right? He would sing Orunmila awake. And Orunmila would wake up in a great mood. He'd go about his day, being Mr. Rawalao, ebos, readings, initiations, whatever he had going on, and everything was great. But with time, Obesa became comfortable and complacent within his function. So instead of singing Orula awake, he would shove him awake and be like, yo, get up. Now, this would cause Orunmila to become very agitated, cranky, and nasty, for lack of a better phrase. And he would take it out, on everyone in his house, but who would get the brunt of it was his wife, Ochung. And Ochung was like, yo, this guy Obesa is making my life horrible because he wakes up my husband the wrong way, and then my husband interacts with all of us the wrong way, so I got to get rid of Obesa, right? Now, mind you, Obesa had been warned multiple times about his character. He was even rude to Oshun, and to women and things like that. That's why this Odu says the person has to be a gentleman, you know, and have those concepts, because the women in the Iami curse Ogbe Sa because of his behavior or lack of chivalry. So Oshun set out on a personal vendetta to replace Ogbe Sa. So she got divination from other awos. Ogbe Sa was revealed, ironically. And she went to deposit the ebo at the river. And when she arrived at the river, she saw a gentleman singing by the river, as nature intended. And she went up to the guy and said, hey, who are you and what are you doing? He says, my name is Obedi, and I am singing. And she said, yeah, but you have no clothes on. I mean, you sing very well. Like, what's your deal? You know, obviously you're talented. Why are you naked? He said, well, I mean, I don't have a job. You know, I'm a babalao. I sing, but, you know, no one's employed me or anything like that. You know, I'd really love to get a job and put some clothes on, to be honest with you, miss. And she said, well, I might have an opportunity for you. If you could be punctual and show up at my house at the back door at 3:55 a.m. tomorrow, I'll get you a job. And he said, okay, I'll be there. And he showed up at 3:55, and Oshun threw some clothes on him and introduced him into their marital bedchamber. And at 4 a.m. on the nose, Obedi started singing Orumila awake, right? When Orumila heard this, he woke up, he felt great, and when he looked, he got a little scared because he had no idea who Obedi was. And at that moment, at 4:05, Ogbe Sa walked in late for his job. And Ogbe Sa said, what's going on here? And Orula looked and realized what had occurred, and he looked at Oshun and he said, yeah, Ogbe Sa, what's happening here is you're being replaced. And Obedi is going to, you know, take your job and supervise you because you haven't been doing a very good job and haven't had good iwa up until this point. And Ogbe Sa was like, how could you guys do this to me? And Orula said, how could you do this to us? We've been very good to you. And all you've shown is impunity and a lack of appreciation. You should be ashamed of yourself. But the beautiful thing is your older brother, Obedi, here, is going to show you how to do the right thing. So you just do what he says, right? And Orumila looked at Obedi and he said, bro, as long as you do this, you will have a job forever. And Obedi became the head bawalao of Orumila's house, and Ogbe Sa became his assistant, right? Now, really, really key Odu, you know, when it comes to practice and things like that, along with Obedi. The first thing people say here is Ogbe Sa should avoid bawalaos that are Obedi. I don't know about that. You know, it has to be interpreted because in reality, Ogbe Sa had a lot to learn from Obedi. Now, as far as being replaced and things like that, that wasn't Obedi's fault. That was his fault, and who punished him for it and made him pay for it, better said, was Oshun. So, once again, this Odu says, be very careful with the children of Oshun, respect the children of Oshun, make sure you're respected as well. It's not that we tolerate abuse or mistreatment, but usually Ogbe Sa is the one that falls into infraction here, unfortunately. Through his bad character, through the way he speaks, through their words, their actions, etc., it causes them to fall out of favor with Ifa, and Orumila actually becomes frustrated with the person. Music should always be playing in Ogbe Sa's house because it's what kept Orumila content. Ogbe Sa might have some talent when it comes to singing and things like that, but they have to, you know, pursue it with a pure heart for the purpose rather than their own ego. Be very careful because this Odu says that the person could be replaced, whether it's at work, whether it's in a relationship, whatever it may be. Really, people want to be a little more like Obedi here. Obedi was humble. Obedi was a good guy. You know, Obedi gets a really bad rap throughout the corpus of Ifa because they said, oh, he stole Ogbe Sa's position. No, he didn't. He was just more prepared and had better character. If someone can trust you and like you, you'll be compensated for sure. So Obedi was trustworthy and likable, and he was also very proficient. You know, he was punctual. He got to work on time. He was a good guy. He was a nice guy, and everybody really liked him. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, it went very well for him, and he was on good terms with Oshun. They say that, and this is how Ifa is this beautiful spider web, that Obedi had actually performed a bow with the two hens at the river when Oshun ran into him, which is in the Odu Obedi for anybody that's seen that episode. So it shows how Ogbe Sa's lack of sacrifice and Obedi's persistence upon it, and Oshun's as well, caused them to interact, and he got the job because of it. A couple key points that manifest because of this Odu. This is why Orumila wakes up at 4 in the morning. You know, if we're ever going to ask something from Ifa, it's best to do so at that time. Another thing is Obedi wakes up at 4 in the morning. Now, why is this so key? Is because Obedi is manifested by the morning dew. And the morning dew, or the sereno, you know, descends upon the leaves at 4 in the morning. You know, leaves, they say that it's from the time that the sun comes up, not a bad habit, but technically once the dew falls on the leaves, we can start picking them again, you know, which represents Obedi and the waking up of Orumila, and Orumila is nothing more than nature. So the leaves being refreshed and being able to be used, because Orumila would wake up to get the herbs before everybody, you know. This is also one of the Odus, one that speaks of why two Babalawos have to give Koko to Orula. And for anybody that's received a sacrifice from Ifa or has given one towards Ifa, they've seen this concept in play where the elder Babalao is manifesting Obedi, who is Obesa's elder, and the other Babalao, the junior, is manifesting Obesa. That's why to be able to wake up Orula or get his attention and all these things, we verse Obedi and Obesa, right? Apart from other invocations and things that occur there. So it speaks of that. Obesa Fefe speaks a lot about nature, right? It's an Odu that speaks of the leaves. It speaks of, you know, Osain quite a bit, the forest and things like that. It speaks a lot about the different animals, but probably the most popular one here is the deer, right? To the point where Obesa should even wear deer skin or have deer skin, I don't know, decorations, or, you know, it's the Ifa of the deer. And the first thing that Obesa says is haga la cosa completa. Says do things completely. Don't leave things halfway, because if you do things halfway, you're only going to get half of the results, right? So in this Odu, Ochosi was trying to hunt the deer, and the deer was trying to escape Ochosi. So they both went to visit Orumila on separate occasions. And when they did this, Ifa told them to perform sacrifice with the divination of Obesa to be able to, in Ochosi's case, get the deer, or in the deer's case, preserve her life. So they both did the ebo, but they did it halfway. And when they went into the jungle to deposit it, they ran into each other, where Ochosi shot his arrow and the deer jumped out of the way. But the arrow killed the deer's son, right? Unfortunately, Obesa speaks of the loss of a child. So we have to be very careful with that, family. So they both went to visit Orumila on separate occasions. The deer went and said, hey, you know, I did it, but my son died. You know, what's the point of that? And Orula said, well, did you do it 100%? He said, no, I did it half. And he said, well, you were able to save your life, but you lost your son, so you got half of the results. And Ochosi came in, you know, he was very angry. He said, yeah, I got the baby deer, but I wanted the big deer. He said, well, did you do the bow completely? He said, no, I did it half. He said, well, you didn't go hungry, but you only got the small deer, so that's how the cookie crumbles. So that's why Obesa says do things completely so you get the full result. There is no point in putting all this effort and funds and energy into things to only see them halfway through, you know, so we have to stay motivated and be accountable so that we always get what destiny has in store for us. But if we're not careful, Obesa is somebody that's unfulfilled and never really sees the fruit of their labors because of their lack of motivation, energy, and efforts. Another story about the deer here is where the deer got scared, right? And he went to visit Orumila to decide whether he should go back or not. And Orumila with Obesa said, hey, don't go back to find out what scared you. You know, if you survived and you moved on, that's it. You don't have to think about it. But the deer couldn't resist. And the deer went back without performing a bow. And at that moment, Ochosi was waiting, this parallel timeline, of course, different pataki, and killed the deer, right? And, you know, curiosity killed the deer here, not the cat. So this is the Odu why the deer gets scared and then comes back to find out what scared him. Like, you know, for all the hunter brothers and things like that, you know, that happens. You know, the deer will actually come back, and you usually get them the second time around. So this Odu says curiosity, anxiety, things like that, definitely something that has to be mitigated and controlled because it can lead to very negative situations. Another thing that's in this Odu as a proverb says, the secret to life is not making the same mistake twice, right? Because usually the second time is worse. And in this case, the deer's second mistake was the worst, because first, he shouldn't have been there to begin with, right? So he survived that. So Rumila said, don't do that again, but the deer didn't listen, and the second time he lost his life. The Odu Obesa is also known as Ogbe Soto or Ogbe Sotito, where it says Obe is honest, where Ifa says that the best way for Ogbe Sa to live is through honesty and integrity, but to not be honest to the point where he could hurt people, because there are truths that can hurt quite a bit. So Ogbe Sa says, live in truth, but know when to, express certain things and how to express them so that you don't hurt your loved ones or the people around you, thus creating enemies. Because Obesa has a way of speaking that could be offensive, right? Kind of like the crabs. If you ever try to touch a crab, it hisses. So definitely something to be careful with. Going back to the deer, in the Odu Obesa, it speaks of the deer once again, and the deer's greatest enemy was the leopard. And they had heard through the grapevine that the leopard was dead, and they were going to do a funeral for him. So the deer went running to Orula. Divination was performed. Obesa was revealed, where the Odu Obesa says, don't go to funerals, But the deer was like, I want to see my enemy dead. And he said, what do you care? The guy's dead, move on. Whatever satisfaction comes from that, just go live your life. The guy's already dead. But the deer was like, nope, I'm going to go. Orula was like, bon voyage. And the deer went to the funeral. So it was his turn to go up to the leopard. And the deer, had this thing where he wanted to be able to put his hoof on the leopard's chest. He wanted to be like, look at my enemy dead, and look at me dominating him by putting my hoof on his chest, and he can't do nothing about it. I'll be the first deer to ever put my hoof on a leopard's chest without dying. He did that, but something weird happened. He heard a thump and another thump, and he realized the leopard wasn't dead. And at that moment, all the animals freaked out because the deer freaked out, and all of them escaped except the deer. And once he was eating the deer, the leopard was like, man, you fool. Of all the people that came, I never expected to see you here, but this is why you're dead and I'm not. So this Odu says, once again, we have to listen to Ifa. We have to be obedient to Ifa. Obesa has a natural aversion towards places of death and transition. We should avoid funerals. We should avoid cemeteries. We should avoid hospitals to a certain degree. Now, this is unless necessary. I'm not saying that anybody with Obesa shouldn't go to, God forbid, a parent's funeral or something, intense like that, But we have to be very measured, A funeral can be a very toxic environment. It can be a very overstimulating environment. There's a lot of energy. Sometimes we run into family that we didn't know existed, and they're here to see what they can get. You might run into a family member you don't get along with, You might not get along with a family member you didn't know you didn't get along with until that moment, So Ifa says you have to be very careful and measured when visiting any high, emotionally overstimulated, ambiances like, a funeral or a hospital room or even cemeteries. Obesa is not someone that should be in places like this that overstimulate. One of the things that's in Obesa that's very key is the bóveda. And there's a very specific bóveda style shrine that's mounted here that's known as El Trono de Iku, right? Or Odo Iku, where it speaks of a specific style of bóveda that needs to be prepared for Obesa to be able to spiritually elevate, right? Another thing, and this is spiritual, but it's in the scripture of Ifa, ebony wood, as far as a crucifix, should be placed in the central glass of Obesa's bóveda, because they say that wood carries the spirituality that Obesa's eguns need to be able to elevate, right? In this Odu, it speaks of the Orisha Shango as well. In this sign, it speaks specifically of the ram, right? And the ram was best friends with Igi, right? Or the stick. So one day, the ram went for divination with Ifa. And the Odu Obesa was revealed, his own Odu. And, he received the advice from Orumila. Orumila stated to him that he should not allow people in his house. He should not allow people to visit him randomly and things like that, because a betrayal or an enemy could infiltrate through those means. So the ram was like, well, my only friend is the stick, so I don't got nothing to worry about. And Orula was like, okay. So the ram went home, and ironically that day, the stick came knocking on his door, and the ram was like, who is it? The stick was like, stick. Ram was like, oh, Orula told me not to open the door for nobody today. And the stick was like, yeah, listen to Orula, I'm your best friend, bro. And he was like, yeah, you're right, Orula's an idiot. And he opened the door. And at that moment, the rope went around the ram's neck. And ironically, the rope was tied to the stick and the rope were dragging the ram out. And the ram was like, what are you doing? And he said, no, you think you're better than me? The rope has told me all the things you said. The rope was manipulating the stick. Like, it was just this wild scenario. But what they ended up doing was bringing the ram out to be executed. And when they executed the ram looked at heaven and said, Father, I haven't done anything to deserve this. And, Olodumare and Orula and all of them in heaven said, yeah, you were disobedient. You should have listened to Orula and trusted in him more than anyone around you, because, this is an Odu of betrayal. So this Odu says, our house is our temple. The less people that visit it, the better, this Odu says. Because if we're not careful, the people that we think care about us or love us, they might be the people who actually do the complete opposite. Friends, etc. The less people that know where Ogbe Sa lives, the better. But it is the Odu of the ram, where the person, has to avoid being hard-headed, closed-minded, and carry on behaviors that are unproductive. But from a positive standpoint, the ram was a good guy. He had a good heart. He had integrity. He had good wishes for everybody. But, in the negative, he could be a little naive, and he could be a little manipulated. The children of Ogbe Sa have to be very careful with the children of Shango here, because in this Odu, Shango manipulated the stick and the rope and all of those involved to betray the ram so that he could ultimately, sacrifice the ram and consume them. So, it's not that, we're terrified of the children of Shango or anything like that in this Odu, but we want to make sure that, when we're interacting with them, it's an equanimous relationship, and it's not one-sided or anything like that. Now, what if the person is a child of Shango? Then they're the ram. Even they have to be careful with other children of Shango, or that are around people with toxic Shango characteristics, right? Shango in this Odu, he manipulated people towards an end without really caring about the people he manipulated, because it didn't necessarily benefit the rope and the stick to help Shango with his plot, because Shango gave them no recognition or recompense from it. So, it was a complete waste of time on their behalf, which actually, blessed Shango quite a bit, right? So various Orishas speak here, whether it's Orumila, Eshu, is one of the Orishas here as well. This is one of the Odus that speaks of when Eshu and Obatala were trying to save the world and incorporate new methods so that people could, be honest with each other and live in harmony and whatnot. But unfortunately, humanity never really assimilated it. So because of that, it kind of fell through. So it was a failed task, where Obesa is somebody that on a consistent basis is trying to help the people around them better themselves or do better or lead by example. Ultimately, the people that are on that same wave are going to be the ones to, persist upon that. But if not, this Odu says that we shouldn't be overly persistent, because not everybody is ready to change their lives or better themselves, and it could cause them to have contention with people unnecessarily. So that's there as well. The Orisha Odudua speaks heavily in Obesa as well. It's one of the Odus that speaks of the importance of La Letra del Año, or the Odu Abaye, which is the Odu that ultimately guides Earth, whether it's in Africa or Cuba or within your own home. It's one of the Odus that stipulates the importance of having very good habits with Ifa so that the person can progress and things like that. And this is one of the Odus that speaks of when Odudua actually manifested, the letter of the year and, the guidance that it provides. Obesa is a very divine Odu. It's one that, influences Ifa quite a bit. It has a lot of great information, But with all the Obes, as we've been able to see, it's one that states that, we have to have a lot of organization. We have to have a lot of self-control. And it's one where if we're not careful, it can be such a powerful Odu that it can be unmanageable, right? Ogbe Sa was able to advance quite a bit through his good character, through him being gentlemanly and chivalrous, being polite, being refined. It's an Odu where the person has to become a master of interaction, right? Shango kind of tapped into that here, but he tapped into it in a toxic fashion. And because of it, it ultimately led to the demise of the ram. So when it comes to, interactions and things like that, we never want to use any of our powers to push a negative narrative or to put people in a position that is not going to benefit them. So definitely a very powerful Odu. One of my favorite Obes because, you can learn so much from it. And what do you think, Phil?
I like the Ogbe series that we do.
The Obes were the juggernauts, after the Meis, and each of them teaches so much as we learn. So like a bunch of Brother Bawalaos sometimes reach out and say, hey, what do I study now? And I tell them, once you've gotten through your specific signs and once you've gotten through the Meis and whatnot, it never hurts to read all of the Obes. Which is why we kind of started off with these. Yeah. Because, they provide so much information and so many mystery. And, ultimately, it's part of the education that all of us need because through learning these 16, so many other things, or 15, right? Because ultimately, a Yobe is an Obe. Through learning the Obes, the enrichment towards your Ifa education and practice, it can't be quantified. It's going to carry you through a whole career.
Yeah, and speaking of education, you know how you want to learn some stuff with us?
Oh, yeah.
By joining our membership program.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at these segues. Just saying. But yeah, guys, we have a membership program. It's 3 different tiers. Each tier gives you options, which is extra shows, discounts on merch and courses, even exclusive live shows just for you guys. So the VIPs have their own live show, too, that they get that nobody else gets. So if you're missing those episodes, we got over 1,600 on the channel, so 1,600 total. So there's probably a few hundred in the membership platforms, but yeah, go ahead and get on that. So today I'm going to spotlight our VIPs.
Nice, the
VIPs, man. But these are the newest VIPs, right? So they haven't been here that long, but they've still been here a pretty good time. So
welcome.
So we got K Libra. They've been here for 25 days.
Very nice.
We got G.A. Bamez.
Okay.
So 1 month. We got Princess Larezia. Sorry, I can't read. At 1 month, we got the Magical Nurse. Nice. At 1 month.
Very nice.
We got the 4 Languages, also at 1 month.
Okay.
We got AODG. Nice. At 2 months. Okay. We got Jose Papo, 3 months.
Thank you, Papo.
Holy GTV at 5 months.
Nice, Iboru.
Parker Denny at 8 months, and Billy Tan at 8 months. VIPs, baby.
Oh, shout out to the VIPs. Guys, let us know how the membership's going for you. Be sure to take advantage of being able to ask questions and get those video responses from us. We enjoy it so much. Couple thoughts before we go ahead and disconnect. Don't forget about those workshops in Atlanta and New York. We can't wait to see all of you there. It's going to be a great learning experience for all of those involved. BotanicaCandlesandMore.com is up and running for all your product and service needs. We do ship. If you can't watch us on YouTube, be sure to listen to the podcast on major apps like iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Apple. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. A big thank you from all of us here at Our Roots Podcast. And until next time, see the light.
Baba Joseph showed the path today. Baba knows the way, we follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients, he honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.